Lena stood close to her mother, her hand lightly touching the woman's arm as they entered the large music hall. The place was filled with soft chatter, footsteps on the polished floor, and the distant sound of a grand piano being tuned. Most people who walked in were students or professionals with shiny instrument cases. Lena, however, carried nothing but a small white cane folded in her bag and the quiet hope that she would finally get a chance to prove herself. She could not see the hall, but she felt it. The air here was different, cooler, heavier, and filled with a low echo that told her the room was big, maybe even huge. She could imagine tall ceilings and bright lights, though she had never seen them. What she could sense clearly was the nervous excitement of the other people. She heard the quick tapping of someone's shoes, the rustle of sheet music, a small laugh between two teenagers, and the sound of someone practicing scales far away. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "We made it," she whispered, trying to sound calm. But Lena could hear the tremble in her voice. They had traveled a long distance on crowded buses and trains, carrying only the basics. This workshop was something they could barely afford, but a local charity had helped pay for it after hearing Lena play at a community event. Lena smiled a little. "I can hear the piano. It sounds beautiful." Her mother looked at her as if she wished she could give her the whole world. "Maybe today is the day someone really notices you," she said softly. Lena hoped so too. She had practiced for years, every morning, every night, sometimes until her fingers hurt. She knew she had something to offer. She could feel music in a way she couldn't explain. But she also knew most people didn't believe in her ability the moment they saw her blindness. Today, however, she was determined not to let doubt touch her. After a few minutes, a staff member approached them. His shoes clicked loudly, and he moved quickly. Not the gentle, slow pace of someone cautious around a blind person. "Are you here for the master class?" he asked. "Yes," her mother replied. "My daughter, Lena, is one of the participants." The man paused, just a small pause, but Lena felt it like a shift in the air. "Oh, all right, follow me. The maestro will begin shortly." The way he said "oh" made Lena's stomach tighten. She was used to that tone. It wasn't cruel. It was simply a tone that suggested a quiet doubt she had heard all her life. Still, she followed calmly as the man led them to the front row. She walked with her cane folded, keeping her other hand gently on her mother's arm. She moved with confidence because she wanted no one's pity. She had been blind long enough to know how to handle herself. "You can sit here," the staff member said. Chairs creaked as people settled. More students filled the room, their conversations buzzing around her. Lena sat straight, listening closely to every sound. She could hear the piano clearly now. Someone was playing a few test chords, and the notes rang sharp and clean. The room had perfect acoustics. Every sound bounced back gently, like a soft afterglow of music. Then everything went quiet as the main door opened. People started whispering, "He's here. That's him. I can't believe I'll get to learn from him today." Lena heard slow, confident footsteps. She didn't need anyone to tell her who it was. The famous maestro, the star pianist who had traveled the world performing on grand stages. She had listened to recordings of his concerts many times. His music was powerful, elegant, and full of energy. She admired his talent deeply, but she also knew he had a reputation for being strict, and sometimes harsh. He spoke with a firm voice, calm but commanding. "Good morning, everyone." The room responded together. "Good morning. I am glad to see such a large number of young musicians here today," he continued. "I hope all of you are ready to learn. I do not teach beginners. I expect commitment, discipline, and respect for the art." His words were clear and serious. Lena felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She wanted him to hear her play. She wanted him to understand her ability without judging her before she touched the keys. As he talked about technique and expression, she listened carefully, absorbing every word. She did not have sheet music, but she didn't need any. She learned by sound, by memory, by feeling the flow of music inside her. After the introduction, the maestro said, "Before we begin, I want to hear each participant play a short piece, just a minute or two." People clapped lightly, eager for their turns. Her mother touched her arm quietly. "Are you ready?" Lena nodded, though her heart was beating faster now. One by one, the students walked up to the piano. Each played something different: classical pieces, personal compositions, or technical exercises. The maestro commented after each performance, sometimes giving praise, sometimes giving sharp corrections. "Too much pedal, your timing is off. You lack emotion in that passage." He was never cruel, but he wasn't gentle either. He believed in perfection. Then, Finally, the staff member announced, "Next, Lena." The room quieted. Lena felt dozens of eyes turn toward her. Though she could not see them, she stood slowly, feeling for her cane but choosing not to open it. She didn't want people thinking she needed special help. She held her mother's arm for just a moment, then let go and walked carefully toward the sound of the piano. Her steps were steady. She knew how to count distance by sound, the echo of her own shoes, the silence just before the instrument. When she reached the piano bench, she paused and lightly touched the edge. That tiny touch told her everything she needed to know. The wood was warm, the bench sturdy, the piano tall and heavy. It was a grand piano, a very good one. But before she could sit, the maestro's voice cut through the silence. "Wait," he said. Lena froze, unsure what she had done wrong. He stepped closer. She could hear his shoes on the floor, slow, controlled, each step filled with purpose. He spoke directly to her, and though his tone wasn't loud, it hit her like a cold wind. "You are blind." She nodded quietly. "Yes, sir." A soft ripple moved through the audience, whispers, shifting chairs, curious breaths. The maestro sighed, and the sound was heavy, almost annoyed. "My classes are very demanding. They require precision and visual understanding. I work with serious musicians who are preparing for professional stages." He paused, playing the piano without seeing the keys. "This is not the place for that." The words cut deeper than he intended, and she felt them settle in her chest. She had heard similar comments before, but hearing them from someone she admired made the sting sharper. Her mother stood from her seat. "Sir, she has practiced for years. She can play." But he interrupted gently, though firmly. "Madam, I am sure she tries very hard. But this is not a charity program. This is advanced training. A blind girl cannot follow the techniques we are working on today." The room went silent. No one dared speak. Some students felt uncomfortable. Others quietly agreed, thinking it made sense. Lena stood still for a long moment. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. She was simply tired of being judged before she ever touched a key. She lowered her head slightly. "I just wanted to play," she whispered softly. The maestro sighed again. "I understand, but this workshop is not suitable for your condition." Her fingers curled slightly, not in anger, but in a quiet sadness she had carried for years. She didn't want pity or recognition. She only wanted a chance to show what she could do. Just once she took a small step away from the bench, but before she could move farther, another voice spoke from the side of the room. A softer, kinder voice. "Maestro, maybe she can at least try. Just 1 minute. Let her show you." It was the workshop director. The maestro hesitated. He didn't want to seem unfair in front of so many students. After a long pause, he said coldly, "1 minute. But do not expect applause or sympathy." Lena turned slowly back toward the piano. She reached out and touched it again, feeling its smooth surface. She felt something inside her shift, not anger, but a quiet, growing determination. She whispered to herself, just loud enough to hear her own breath. "Let me show him." She sat down slowly, adjusted her posture, and lifted her hands above the keys. The hall went absolutely silent. Everyone watched. Everyone waited. Lena took a deep breath. The moment her fingertips touched the keys, the world around her faded. The sound of the audience, the hurt from the maestro's words, the long journey here, all of it dissolved. What remained was the piano. And the music inside her. Long before Lena ever stepped into that music hall, her world had already been shaped by sound. She did not remember the day she lost her sight. She had been too young, barely 5, when an illness stole the last bit of light she could see. What she remembered instead were voices. Her mother's voice, gentle and steady, the voice of neighbors who spoke softly around her, and the voice of her grandmother, who played old folk songs on a worn-out keyboard that never quite stayed in tune. Her grandmother's home always smelled like warm bread and jasmine tea. People often came by to listen to her play, even when the keyboard made tiny clicking sounds or keys stuck sometimes. The songs still flowed beautifully through her fingers. Lena used to sit beside her, leaning against her arm, feeling the vibrations of the music travel through the wooden bench. She didn't understand it then, but those little vibrations would later help her in ways no one could imagine. "Music is not in the eyes," her grandmother used to say softly. "It is in the hands, in the heart, and in the quiet space inside you where feelings live." Lena didn't fully grasp the meaning as a child. She only knew she loved the way music made her feel like the world was bigger than her darkness. After her eyesight faded, she became more aware of every sound. She could tell who was walking by their footsteps. She could sense a person's mood from the way they breathed. She even knew when her mother was pretending to be brave. Her mother always tried to sound strong. But when the house grew silent at night, Lena could hear the woman cry softly, thinking her daughter was asleep. She cried because she feared life would be too hard for Lena. But Lena never saw herself as weak. She learned to memorize the layout of rooms, count steps between places, and listen for tiny cues in her environment. A chair moving, a cup being placed on a table, the whistling sound of wind slipping through a window crack. All of it helped her understand her surroundings. Most children grow up coloring books or playing outside with friends. Lena grew up listening to the world. Her grandmother's house was where she truly learned to use her ears. Sometimes the older woman would play a melody and say, "Tell me what you hear." And Lena would describe everything she noticed: the high notes that sounded bright like sunlight, the deep tones that felt like a quiet night, the way the rhythm changed like footsteps on different kinds of ground. Her grandmother always smiled and said, "You hear more than most people who can see." When Lena was 8, her grandmother gave her the old keyboard. It wasn't new or fancy. Some keys were uneven, and it made a soft humming sound when plugged in. But it was Lena's treasure. She would sit for hours, pressing keys, exploring sounds, trying to create little tunes. At first, she made simple melodies, slow, careful ones that matched her timid confidence. But as months passed, her fingers grew stronger, faster, braver. She learned to play by memory, then by feeling the distance between notes, then by imagining colors and shapes inside her mind. She began to understand something that many sighted players struggled with. Music is not just about hitting the right keys. It is about telling a story. Her grandmother noticed it too. "You play like you're speaking," she said once, after listening to Lena try a new tune. "As if your hands are talking." Those words made Lena laugh. "I don't know what my hands are saying," she said shyly. "They are saying everything you feel," her grandmother whispered. The years passed peacefully until illness took her grandmother away. That day became one of the hardest moments of Lena's life. She couldn't see the faces around her, but she could hear the wet, shaking breaths of people crying. She felt her mother's hand tremble in hers. The house grew quiet in a way she had never known before. Even the keyboard seemed silent, as if it understood someone important was gone. Lena didn't play for weeks after that. Every time she touched the keys, she remembered her grandmother's gentle guidance, her soft humming, her warm hands guiding Lena's small fingers. The memories were too heavy. But her grandmother had left behind a handwritten letter for her. Her mother read it aloud one evening. In it, her grandmother wrote, "My dear, you may walk in darkness, but darkness will never walk in you. Your heart is full of light, and your music will be the way you let that light shine. Do not stop. Play for yourself. Play for others. Play for me." Those words changed everything. Lena went back to the keyboard that night and began to play again, letting her emotions flow into the music. The sadness, the longing, the memories, she poured them all into the keys. She cried while she played, but she kept playing. When she was done, she felt lighter. Over time, she became even better. Her mother noticed, and so did neighbors, teachers, and people who visited their town. They would come to hear her play at small events, local gatherings, charity dinners, school shows. She never asked for applause. She just wanted to make people feel something through her music. One evening, a man who worked with a local charity heard her performance and was deeply moved. He spoke to her mother afterward and said he knew of an upcoming workshop with a world-famous pianist. "She deserves to be there," he insisted. "Her talent is real." At first, her mother was unsure. She didn't want Lena to face rejection or cruelty. She knew people sometimes looked at her daughter with pity or confusion. But Lena wanted to try. She wanted to grow. She wanted to challenge herself in front of someone who understood music at the highest level. So they applied, and by some miracle, she received a scholarship. The weeks before the workshop were intense for Lena. She practiced every day, polishing her technique, strengthening her memory. She listened to recordings of the maestro and admired his control, his energy, his precision. She dreamed of playing something meaningful for him, something that would show him she was more than her blindness. Her mother, meanwhile, saved every bit of money they had to afford the travel costs. She packed their small bags with care, making sure Lena had comfortable clothes, snacks, and her favorite tea. On the morning of the journey, her mother woke her with a soft kiss on the forehead and said, "Today is special." The trip was long. They sat on crowded buses, stood in noisy train stations, and walked along unfamiliar streets. Lena held her mother's arm tightly. listening to the environment shift, doors opening, wheels clattering, voices blending into a blur. She felt tired, but her excitement kept her going. When they finally reached the workshop building, she could tell it was large by the way sounds echoed around her. The marble floor under her feet felt cool and smooth. People were rushing around, greeting each other, tuning instruments. It felt like stepping into another world, one she had only imagined before. She wasn't nervous yet, just hopeful. She could sense her mother's pride when they were guided to the front seats. People didn't know who she was. They didn't know what she could do. Lena was used to being underestimated, and she had learned not to take it personally. In her mind, she kept replaying her grandmother's voice, "Your music is your light." But the moment the maestro asked if she was blind, her hope began to crack. She felt the shift in the room, the air growing heavier with judgment. His words reminded her of every time she had been told she wasn't capable, every moment someone doubted her before giving her a chance. Still, she reminded herself of something her grandmother used to say, "People fear what they do not understand." She knew the maestro didn't understand her yet. Most people didn't. When he finally allowed her 1 minute to play, she felt a mix of fear and determination. Not fear of failing, fear of not being allowed to show her true ability. As she sat at the piano, touching the keys gently, memories flooded her mind. Her grandmother's shaky hands guiding hers, the old keyboard's broken notes, the quiet moments of practicing alone, the letter promising that her music carried light. She took a slow, deep breath, letting the familiar warmth of the piano wash over her fingers. She remembered how it felt to play freely, how sound was her way of painting the world she couldn't see. She whispered a quiet message in her heart, not to the maestro or the crowd, but to the memory of her grandmother. "This is for you." And with that, she prepared to play, not to prove others wrong, but to prove to herself that she belonged here. When Lena placed her hands on the piano, the room felt different. It was as if every breath, every tiny movement around her faded into the background. All she could sense was the stillness of the hall and the cool surface of the keys beneath her fingertips. She did not start playing right away. She needed a moment, not to calm herself, but to understand the voice of the piano in front of her. Every piano had a voice. She learned that long ago. Some sounded sharp and proud, like a clear winter morning. Others sounded warm and gentle, like a soft blanket. This piano felt strong and deep. She pressed one key lightly, then another, listening carefully. The sound was rich, full, alive. It reminded her of the ocean she had once heard on a school trip, the way waves rolled in and out, steady but powerful. Behind her, the maestro stood with his arms folded. He didn't say anything, but she could feel his doubt like a wall behind her back. The students sitting nearby were quiet, almost holding their breath. Her mother was somewhere in the front row, hands clasped tightly, hoping for the best, but terrified of the worst. Lena took one more slow breath. Then she lifted her hands slightly, letting her fingers hover above the keys. She remembered what her grandmother used to say, "Feel the music before you play it," and she did. She remembered the way her grandmother's songs wrapped around her when she was young. She remembered the sound of rain hitting the window on the night she wrote her first melody. She remembered her mother's tired but proud voice when she finished a performance at a small community event. All of those memories blended into one feeling that settled inside her chest. And then, she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper. She wanted to understand the piano fully before letting herself go. Each key she pressed gave her information, the tone, the vibration, the response of the instrument. Slowly, she connected with it, as if greeting an old friend. The melody she chose wasn't one anyone would recognize. It was hers, a tune she had created over many nights, shaped by feelings she never told anyone out loud. The piece started slow, floating gently like a quiet breeze. Her fingers moved carefully but confidently, and she leaned slightly forward as if listening to a secret. A few people in the audience shifted in their chairs, surprised. They had expected something simple, maybe even clumsy. Instead, they heard a sound that felt intentional, emotional, and strangely familiar in a way they couldn't explain. The maestro's eyebrows lowered. He wasn't impressed yet, but he didn't look bored anymore. As Lena continued, her hands grew steadier. Her fingers danced across the keys, finding notes without searching for them. She had memorized this piece through feeling, not sight. Every movement was natural, effortless. She didn't need sheet music to guide her. She had something stronger, memory and heart. She let the melody grow gradually. Soft notes turned into fuller chords. Her left hand supported the rhythm while her right hand carried the emotion. painting an invisible picture in the air. She didn't see the piano or the people or the hall. She saw only the world inside her mind, the world she had built out of sound over the years. As she played, she forgot about the maestro's doubt and the whispers. She forgot about the long journey and the fear she had felt moments earlier. All she knew was that this was where she belonged. The hall remained silent. Even people who had planned to record videos for fun forgot to lift their phones. They were caught off guard by her sincerity. It wasn't the kind of performance that asked for attention. It simply held them, with its honesty. Lena reached the middle part of her piece, where the music shifted. It became deeper, calmer, like a moment of reflection. She played it gently, letting each note stretch into the air. It was her favorite section because it reminded her of her grandmother's breathing, when she used to fall asleep in her lap. Some of the listeners felt their eyes sting. They didn't know her story. They didn't know who she was or what she had gone through. But they felt something in the music. Something real. The maestro, however, wasn't emotional yet. He listened with a trained ear, noticing the smooth phrasing, the control in her hands, the way she shaped each note with care. Something bothered him, not in a bad way, but in a way he couldn't place. Her style. It felt old, familiar, something he hadn't heard since he was a student himself. But he brushed the thought away and continued watching. As Lena approached the next part of her piece, she allowed the melody to rise. This was the most difficult section, fast, flowing, filled with quick shifts. She had practiced it hundreds of times. She remembered the hours she spent with her hands aching, repeating each phrase until it felt natural in her fingers. She lifted her hands slightly, then let them fall into the pattern she knew so well. The audience straightened instantly. Her fingers flew across the keys, not wildly, but with precise speed. Every note was clean, every transition smooth. It wasn't the speed that caught people's attention, it was the emotion behind it. It felt like she was telling a story of running through a field, chasing a memory she loved. Even the maestro leaned a little closer, no longer uninterested. He recognized the technique now. It wasn't something a beginner could do. It wasn't even common among advanced players. It was a style used by older musicians who played not for applause, but for personal expression. And somehow this blind girl had learned it on her own. Her mother covered her mouth with her hand, tears gathering in her eyes. She knew her daughter was talented, but seeing her play in this huge hall, before a famous pianist, with such courage, it filled her with a kind of pride she couldn't put into words. Lena wasn't thinking about any of that. She didn't play for recognition. She didn't play to prove the maestro wrong. She played because music was the only place in the world where she felt completely free. She reached the final part, slow again, tender, like a soft goodbye. Her hands moved gently, but with emotion so deep it made the room feel smaller, more intimate. She let each note linger just a little longer than necessary, as if giving the music time to breathe. A long silence followed her final chord. It hung in the air like a fading light. She kept her hands on the keys for a moment, letting the sound dissolve completely before pulling back. When she finally turned her head slightly toward where she imagined the audience was, she didn't hear clapping. Not yet, not because they didn't like it, because they were stunned. People looked at each other, unsure if they should clap yet. Some wiped their eyes quietly. Others stared at her hands in disbelief. Lena didn't know any of that. She only felt the stillness, the quiet, the soft shift of air as people leaned forward. She wasn't sure if she had done well or poorly. She only knew she had given everything she had. She stood slowly, unsure what to expect. She didn't expect praise. She didn't expect people to suddenly admire her. She was ready to accept whatever came next. The maestro stepped forward. His footsteps were slower than before, but heavier, as if he was carrying a thought he didn't want to show. He stopped near her, and for a moment he did not speak. Lena waited. The room waited. Finally, he said something she didn't expect. "Play that section again." His voice was different. It didn't sound cold or annoyed. It sounded curious, almost confused. Lena froze. She wasn't sure if she heard him right. The maestro repeated, "The second part, the part with the rising melody. Play it again." The students exchanged shocked looks. The workshop director raised his eyebrows. Even Lena's mother let out a tiny gasp. No one had ever heard the maestro ask anyone to repeat a section unless he saw potential. Lena nodded slightly. She sat again, placed her hands gently on the keys, and began to play the requested section. Her fingers moved with the same flow, the same emotion. The melody rose like light climbing a wall, smooth and natural. The maestro leaned even closer this time, studying her hands, listening with intensity. He couldn't understand how someone who had never seen the keys could execute such control, how she could phrase the notes with such maturity, how she learned a style that he thought only older generations knew. It was as if he was trying to find the answer hidden between her notes. When she finished the repeated part, she lifted her hands quietly again. The maestro didn't speak, not immediately. He just stood there, staring not at her, but at the piano, as if the instrument itself had told him something he couldn't believe. For the first time in his long career, he found himself speechless, and Lena, unaware of the expression on his face, waited silently, her hands folded in her lap. The room remained quiet as everyone waited for the maestro's response, one that could change everything. He stood backstage longer than he planned, trying to steady his breathing. The soft buzz of the crowd outside drifted in through the curtains, mixed with the faint echo of someone tapping on a stand or dragging a chair. He was supposed to walk out after the short break, but he wasn't ready yet. His hands were still warm from practicing, but the weight inside his chest felt heavier than earlier. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let the distant sounds fade, letting himself return to the memory that pushed him here, the memory of the person who first believed he could play. It wasn't a dramatic moment or a big speech. It was just a quiet afternoon, years earlier, when he sat beside an old piano in a dusty room, and someone gently told him that his hands were made for music. That little sentence had stayed with him, even after life took him in different directions. He opened his eyes again as a stage helper hurried by, carrying a bundle of cables. The helper smiled politely and whispered that everything was ready. He nodded, though deep inside he felt a small knot of fear. Not the kind of fear that stops someone, but the kind that sharpens every breath. He stepped toward the curtain, but just before he pushed it aside, he heard the crowd shifting in their seats. It wasn't impatience. It sounded more like curiosity. Some people whispered softly, maybe wondering who he really was or how someone who once blended into the background could suddenly step into the center. He felt no anger, not anymore. The doubts, the jokes, the small comments people made earlier had faded. What stayed with him now was the quiet courage building inside, the need to show the truth of what music meant to him. Finally, he pushed the curtain slightly and peeked out. The hall wasn't the biggest, but it was full. Lights from above touched the piano in the center like a spotlight waiting for him alone. The instrument looked different now, not just a wooden frame and keys, but something that held a piece of hope. He took a small breath and stepped out. The soft sound of his shoes on the stage seemed too loud at first, but the audience slowly quieted. Some people leaned forward, some sat completely still. It was as if the whole room wanted to hear how the next moment would unfold. When he reached the piano, he gently ran his hand along the smooth edge. It felt cold at first, but familiar. He pulled the seat back just a little, making sure it sat the way he liked. He didn't rush. His movements were calm, steady, almost like a silent conversation with the instrument. When he finally sat down, he placed both hands on his lap and closed his eyes once more. He didn't need to think about the notes. They lived inside him now. What he needed was the strength to let them out. A soft breath left his chest, and he lifted his hands. The first touch on the keys was gentle, a simple note, not loud or dramatic. It floated into the room like a small light. The crowd did not move. Not a single sound came from them. Even the air felt still. He let the next notes follow, slow and steady. They formed a pattern that grew warmer with each second. It wasn't a piece meant to impress. It was a piece meant to speak. Every note carried something, a quiet truth, a hidden feeling, a memory he had never said out loud. As he played, he felt the stage fall away. He wasn't aware of the people watching, the lights above him, or the pressure he carried earlier. All he felt was the flow of sound traveling through his fingers. He shifted the pace gently. The melody rose and dipped, like a story being told without words. Some notes trembled softly, as if holding back tears. Others rang with a calm strength, like someone finally standing tall after being pushed down many times. He didn't look up, but he felt the room changing. The stillness deepened. Someone in the front row brought a hand to their mouth. Another leaned forward, eyes wide. A soft sigh passed through a few seats as if people were releasing breaths they didn't know they were holding. He continued, his hands moving with more confidence as the melody grew fuller. The soft parts blended into stronger, brighter tones. Not loud, not aggressive, just real. The sound shifted again into something peaceful. It was the part he always saved for last during practice. The part that reminded him why he played in the first place. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about sharing something honest. When he reached the softest section, His fingers barely pressed the keys. The notes slipped out like whispers, but they still carried across the hall. Every ear leaned to catch them. Every heart followed. Then came the final rise. It wasn't grand. It wasn't showy. It was simple and full, a blend of strength and kindness in sound form. He played it slowly, letting each note breathe, and finally quiet. His hands rested on the last chord for a long moment before he lifted them. The room did not react at first. There was no immediate applause, no rustling, just stillness. Then a soft gasp echoed somewhere in the middle rows. Someone sniffed, trying not to cry, and then, like a wave, the silence broke. Claps rose, first small and gentle, then louder, then turning into a full rise of sound. The whole hall stood. People clapped with both hands, some wiping their eyes between bursts of applause. Others shook their heads in disbelief, as if they couldn't understand how someone so quiet, someone overlooked earlier, could play with such depth. He sat there, stunned for a moment. He wasn't used to this kind of reaction. His eyes lowered, but a small smile touched his face. Not a proud smile, just a warm, grateful one. When he finally stood up, he bowed softly. The clapping grew even stronger. He stepped back from the piano, feeling both light and grounded at the same time. The earlier doubts that hovered around him were gone now. All that remained was the quiet truth he had shared through music. As he walked backstage again, someone from the staff rushed up to him, almost breathless. They told him the performance was being talked about already, that people were asking who he was, where he learned to play. He simply nodded, still absorbing everything. His heartbeat was steady, warmed out in that moment. He didn't feel like the man who was doubted earlier. He didn't feel like the person who tried to hide his talent for years. He felt whole, backstage. He sat down on a small wooden bench and let himself breathe quietly. He didn't need applause to feel proud. The real victory was inside, knowing he finally showed the world who he really was. As the sounds of the cheering slowly faded, replaced by the shuffling of people leaving the hall, he allowed himself a quiet, peaceful moment. He wasn't done yet. There was still more to share, more to say through music. But for now, he let the calm settle around him, knowing that his journey had taken a new turn, and this time, he wouldn't walk it with doubt, only with courage. He sat alone for a while after the hall emptied, letting the last echoes of applause fade from his mind. The quiet backstage room felt almost unreal, as if everything that happened earlier was just a dream he walked through. But as he touched his fingertips together, still warm from playing, he knew it was real. He had played with everything inside him, and people had heard him, really heard him. He rose slowly, stretched his hands, and stepped outside. The night air felt cool on his face. Streetlights glowed softly, and a small crowd waited near the exit, talking quietly among themselves. Some held programs from the show, some held phones, and others stood with hopeful expressions, as if waiting for one more moment. When they saw him, the murmurs grew louder. People moved aside at first, unsure if they should approach. Then an older man stepped forward. He looked gentle, holding his glasses in one hand, as if he had taken them off to wipe tears. The man thanked him, simple words, spoken slowly. He said the music reminded him of someone he loved dearly. His voice shook. The pianist nodded softly, placing a hand over his heart. No fancy answers, just a quiet understanding. One by one, others came forward. A woman said she had never heard something so calming. A young student told him she felt inspired. A couple said the performance made their whole evening special. He listened to each of them with genuine attention, humbled by their words. He didn't feel like a star. He didn't feel famous. He felt grateful. Then someone from the event staff approached him and said a reporter wanted to speak with him. The reporter stood a little distance away, holding a small recorder and a notebook. She looked excited but polite. He walked toward her, unsure what she would ask. Interviews were never something he imagined for himself. She started by asking simple questions: where he learned to play, how long he had practiced, what inspired the piece he performed. He answered honestly, keeping his words gentle. He didn't talk about fame or dreams of becoming known. He talked about how music saved him on days when the world felt too loud, too heavy. Then the reporter asked something that made him pause. She asked how he felt earlier that day, when someone doubted him so openly. He looked away for a moment, not angry, not hurt, just thoughtful. "I think everyone gets judged at some point," he said quietly. "Sometimes people see only what's on the outside. They don't know the years someone spent learning something in silence. But I didn't play to prove anyone wrong. I played because that's who I am." The reporter nodded slowly, almost moved by his simple honesty. Once the interview ended, he thanked her and began walking toward the path leading home. The crowd slowly drifted away, leaving only the soft sound of footsteps and distant traffic. He walked with a calm heart, carrying the peace of the moment at home. He placed his keys on the small wooden table by the door. The room was quiet, dimly lit, and familiar. His old practice keyboard sat in the corner, the one he used for years while dreaming quietly. He moved toward it, running his hand gently across its worn surface. He remembered all the nights spent there, nights when the world felt heavy, and he played just to breathe. He remembered mornings when he doubted himself, wondering if he should continue, and he remembered the small voice inside that always pushed him forward. He sat down on the stool and touched a few keys. They made a soft, uneven sound, nothing like the grand piano on stage, but the sound comforted him. It reminded him of where everything began. As he played a few gentle notes, a warm sense of clarity washed through him. He didn't want the night to be the peak of his story. He wanted it to be a beginning. The next morning, the sun filtered through the curtains. He woke with a calm smile, feeling lighter than he had in years. After a simple breakfast, he checked his phone and was surprised to see a message from the event manager. They wanted him to return to perform again. The audience had asked about him. Some had even written messages saying they hoped to see him more. He read the message twice, almost unsure whether someone like him could be wanted back so soon. After a moment of quiet thinking, he replied with a small yes. The days that followed became different from anything he expected. People began recognizing him in small places, on the bus, at the corner shop, outside the music center. Not in a loud or overwhelming way, but polite and warm. Some people simply smiled at him. Others thanked him as they passed by. And then, unexpectedly, the famous pianist, the same one who once doubted him, reached out. The message came through the event manager. It said the pianist wanted to meet, not for a challenge, not for a show, but for a conversation. He thought long before agreeing, not out of anger, but because he wanted to be sure he was ready. Finally, he agreed to meet at a music hall in the next city. When he arrived, the hall was mostly empty except for a grand piano on stage. The famous pianist stood near it, waiting. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt quiet, but not tense. The pianist approached him slowly. There was no arrogance this time, no sharp tone. He apologized. Not a short, quick apology, but a sincere one. He said he had judged too soon, spoken too harshly. He admitted he didn't expect such depth from someone he didn't know, and he said he respected what he heard that night. The younger pianist listened, calm and steady. When the apology ended, he nodded. "I don't hold anything against you," he said simply. "Sometimes people don't see the full picture. Maybe that moment helped me find the courage to show who I really am." The older pianist looked relieved, almost grateful. Then something unexpected happened. The older pianist asked if they could play together. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Playing beside someone known around the world felt unreal, but he sensed no rivalry in the request, only respect. They sat side by side at the grand piano. The older pianist began with a calm introduction, and he followed. Their melodies blended like a quiet conversation, two stories meeting in the middle. The sound filled the hall with warmth and gentle strength. When the last note faded, they both sat back slowly. There was no applause, no audience, just a shared silence between two musicians who understood each other now. The older pianist placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Keep playing. You have something rare." He nodded quietly, not with pride, just with gratitude. Weeks later, he returned to the stage for another performance. This time, the hall was even fuller. People came not out of curiosity, but out of genuine admiration. When he stepped on stage, he felt none of the fear from before. He felt steady, whole, and ready. He sat at the piano, closed his eyes, and let the music flow. The melody carried hope, courage, and everything he learned on this journey. And as the notes filled the room, the audience listened with full hearts. By the time he finished, the hall rose in another standing applause. But even as the sound washed over him, he didn't let it change who he was. He stayed grounded, the same person who once played quietly in a small room with an old keyboard. And as he walked off the stage, he knew something clearly. The world had finally heard him, but more importantly, he had finally heard himself. His story wasn't about proving someone wrong. It wasn't about fame. It was about finding courage, sharing truth, and letting music speak when words weren't enough. And with that courage, he stepped into a future full of new notes waiting to be played.